Hello, my name is Don Carrigan, and I'd like to tell you about a new museum that honors the men and women of the former Naval Air Station in Brunswick, Maine, both military and civilian. This grassroots project will preserve an international heritage of war and peace, as well as the remarkable story of a community forever strengthened by the presence of military families in Mid-Coast Maine. I'd also like to take a few minutes to let you know how you can help to create an active museum and resource center supporting our deserving veterans and local youth. Brunswick was the first Maine town to open a municipal airplane landing field. Ahead of its time in 1922, it was only the third such field in all of New England. Unfortunately, it failed within a few years because of lack of use. But 20 years later, with war beginning in Europe, the U.S. Navy prepared to expand its fleet and air patrol capabilities in the Atlantic. Our British allies, under attack at home and needing all available aircraft fuel for combat, asked to have their pilots trained in the United States. The U.S. Navy secured the Blueberry Plains at Cook's Corner near Brunswick for a new airfield. Construction of a training base began in October 1942 and was completed within 6 months. The first U.S. patrol detachments arrived at the Naval Airfield at Brunswick 3 months later, and the first Royal Navy Fleet Air Contingent arrived for training in June of 1943. For over a year, there was on average 1 accident each day. Fortunately, most were minor wing clips and nose-overs. A small chapel was built on the base to support the spiritual needs of men far from home. More than 3,000 young airmen were trained to fly in Brunswick. And thousands of ground crew members also learned their skills here before assignment to the European or Pacific theaters of war. And many gave their lives to achieve victory. After the war, the field was used for demobilization and eventually placed in caretaker status. It was briefly leased for civilian aircraft use, and plans were made for a permanent commercial airport. However, the Cold War put a stop to the new attempt to bring commercial aviation to town. Soviet submarines directly threatened our naval forces, defense facilities, and major cities. The danger of war with a nuclear-armed Soviet Union brought the U.S. Navy back to Brunswick in March of 1951. The renamed Naval Air Station Brunswick welcomed U.S. Navy patrol squadrons flying the P-2 Neptune, a capable plane having 2 propeller-driven engines and 2 jet engines. Aircraft and crew training were conducted around the clock. Anti-submarine weapons and detection devices were constantly upgraded to meet the growing Soviet threat. The base was also greatly expanded and upgraded. Marine Corps and naval construction units were established. The 4-engine turboprop P-3 Orion came to Brunswick in the mid-1960s and became a familiar sight and sound over Mid-Coast Maine for more than 4 decades. Recognizable by its Stinger tail, a magnetic detection device for locating submarines, the aircraft far exceeded the capabilities of the older Neptune airplanes. A larger non-denominational chapel was built in 1965 to serve a growing family-oriented base community. The building was later expanded to add a small Catholic chapel, offices, and 2 enclosed courtyards. And it is this facility that could someday become the home of our new museum. During the Cold War period, Brunswick's patrol squadrons were regularly deployed to NATO bases in Iceland, Spain, Sicily, Bermuda, and the Azores. Beginning in 1990, there were also deployments to the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, Central and South America, and the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Maine communities, schools, organizations, and churches supported the Navy families in every way possible. This eased the burden of long separations and provided many services to military families who needed them. Thousands of Navy families lived for a time on base or in area towns. Many spouses held jobs, volunteered for local charities, or coached area sports teams. The base chapel has been a center of military and civilian interaction. In 1968, a civilian garden club project established a memorial garden in the chapel courtyard to honor fallen service members. Permanent plaques honor flight crews lost in tragic crashes both in Maine and overseas. In the other courtyard, a friendship garden honors both military and civilian supporters of the chapel facility and its gardens. Loving Maine, many military personnel chose to make the area home after leaving active service. Some became civilian employees of the Navy. Some entered new civilian fields. Others chose to enjoy a life of well-earned retirement and leisure. And still others are serving elsewhere today, but are planning to return to Maine. In 2005, the Federal Base Realignment and Closure Commission determined that Naval Air Station Brunswick, its mission completed, must close. Air operations and squadrons were transferred to Jacksonville, Florida, and all remaining NAS Brunswick facilities closed down by the summer of 2011. Meanwhile, the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority was established by the Maine legislature to introduce new uses for this fine facility. Now called Brunswick Landing, the former base is blossoming with business and educational facilities surrounding the Brunswick Executive Airport. First attempted in 1922, Brunswick finally has an operating civilian airfield. In support of the redevelopment, a group of former Navy personnel, museum professionals, and interested community members established a nonprofit organization in 2009. The Brunswick Naval Museum and Memorial Gardens seeks to commemorate naval aviation and the Brunswick-based squadrons and military support units that called Maine their home, and to document their lasting links to the local civilian community. The museum staff and volunteers have begun cataloging artifacts and preparing an exhibit at the entrance to the new civilian hangar. Ultimately, their goal is for the museum to be housed in the former chapel, with its memorial garden courtyards and lawns for aircraft display. A P-3 Orion patrol aircraft is already displayed on this site. And a P-2 Neptune on static display at the main gate for 40 years will soon be moved beside the larger Orion. Title to these aircraft has been transferred to the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., and they have been leased back to Brunswick Landing. When the professional level museum facility is fully established on base, the Naval History and Heritage Command can loan back many other Brunswick artifacts for long-term exhibit. Ultimately, a Corsair should be found and displayed to complete the story. The goals of the museum include maintaining the aircraft and memorial gardens, developing historical museum collections and displays, creating an archive of historical records, and provide a comfortable space for visitors, aircraft-oriented young people, military retirees, and adult volunteers. How can you help? Become a regular member. Volunteer for museum or garden work. Make a significant financial contribution. Donate appropriate artifacts, photos, or documents. Thank you for your interest in this exciting project.